Leo Vance killed the engine, and the mountain silence rushed in. Before him, the ranch materialized like a ghost. The wooden house sagged under the weight of time, its paint peeling away, the weeds knee-high. A cold despair settled in his gut. This wasn't a legacy, it was a tombstone. But then, his loyal dog, Ghost, reacted with strange excitement, circling the house as if greeting an old friend. Why would this desolate place spark such a powerful response from his trusted companion? Please support us by subscribing to the channel. The air in Mr. Abernathy's office was thick with the scent of old paper and stale coffee, a smell Leo Vance associated with finality. He sat stiffly in a leather chair that had seen better decades, its surface cracked like a dry riverbed. His suit, the only one he owned, felt tight across his shoulders, a relic from a life he no longer lived, a man he no longer was. Beneath his chair, a quiet presence offered the only comfort he could feel. Ghost, a 5-year-old German shepherd, lay with his head on his paws, his magnificent coat of silver, gray and white, a stark contrast to the drab, wood-paneled room. His intelligent amber eyes were fixed on Leo, tracking the subtle clench in his jaw, the restless tap of his fingers against his knee. Ghost was more than a service dog. He was an anchor, a silent witness to the silent wars that still raged within Leo's mind. Across from them sat Clara, Leo's younger sister. She was the picture of composure in a tailored black dress, her blonde hair pulled back in a neat, efficient bun. At 32, she moved with the confident energy of someone who had mapped out their life and was now executing it with precision. Her gaze flickered from the lawyer to her watch, a small, impatient movement that spoke volumes. She held a sympathy that felt rehearsed, a grief that was tidy and manageable. The man behind the mahogany desk, Mr. Abernathy, was a friend of their uncle's, a lawyer from a generation that valued handshakes over emails. He was a kind, elderly man with a shock of white hair and glasses perched on the end of his nose. He peered at them over the rims, his expression gentle as he cleared his throat. "Arthur was a good man," he began, his voice raspy with age. "He was very clear about his final wishes. He served his country in the Vietnam War, you know, fought in 1973. A man like that, he sees the world differently." Leo nodded, saying nothing. He knew Uncle Arthur was the only person who had ever truly understood the man Leo became after his own service. He was the one who had encouraged him to get Ghost, the one who never asked questions but always seemed to have the answers. Mr. Abernathy unfolded the document. "Let's begin. To the local Veterans Post, he leaves a donation of $10,000. The lawyer continued, listing small bequests to friends and charities. Leo's mind drifted. He could feel Ghost's warm breath on his ankle. The dog shifted slightly, nudging his leg, a gentle reminder to stay present. "Now, for the primary assets," Mr. Abernathy said, his tone shifting. "To my beloved niece, Clara Jensen, I bequeath my residential property, located in Denver, Colorado, along with all its contents. I also leave her the entirety of my investment portfolio and the remaining balance of my savings and checking accounts." A quiet sigh of relief escaped Clara. It was subtle, but Leo heard it. He saw the tension in her shoulders relax. It was what everyone had expected. Clara was the successful one, the responsible one. She had managed Arthur's affairs in his final years, a task she had performed with dutiful efficiency. Leo felt a familiar hollowness spread through his chest. He expected nothing, and yet the confirmation still stung. He was the drifter, the broken soldier his family didn't quite know what to do with. And finally, Mr. Abernathy looked directly at Leo, his gaze soft but intense. "To my beloved nephew, Leo Vance, I leave my ranch property in Gallatin County, Montana, including all structures and the land itself, free and clear of any debt." Silence descended upon the room. Montana, the word echoed in Leo's head. He remembered vague childhood stories of a remote, rugged piece of land where Arthur would go to escape the world, a place of wind and solitude. Clara turned to him, her expression a mixture of confusion and pity. "The ranch? That's it?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. Mr. Abernathy solemnly folded the will. He slid a large, old-fashioned iron key across the desk toward Leo. It was heavy, ornate, and worn smooth from years of use. As Leo reached for it, the lawyer's eyes met his again. It was a look that lasted only a second, but it was filled with a meaning that transcended the legal jargon of the will. It was a look of shared understanding, a silent message that said, "The true value isn't written on the paper." The meeting concluded. Clara handled the paperwork with the lawyer while Leo stood by the window, staring out at the gray city street without seeing it. The key felt cold and heavy in his hand. Ghost rose and stood beside him, pressing his body against Leo's leg. Once they were in the hallway, the scent of antiseptic cleaner replacing the musty smell of the office, Clara approached him. "Leo, we need to talk about this," she said, her voice low and practical. "I've already spoken to a realtor. The market in that part of Montana is surprisingly active, mostly for developers looking for large plots. We can sell it quickly." Leo turned to face her. "Sell it? Of course, sell it," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "What are you going to do with a neglected, run-down ranch in the middle of nowhere? It's a burden, Leo. Uncle Arthur probably kept it for sentimental reasons, but sentiment doesn't pay the bills. This is the best way I can help you. We'll get a decent price, and you'll have a fresh start. You can get a proper apartment, maybe go back to school. It's long about Ian, and the him." Every word was a carefully placed stone, building a wall between them. She thought she was helping. She genuinely believed she was doing the right thing, offering a practical solution to her impractical, troubled brother. And that, more than anything, was what hurt. She saw the ranch the same way she saw him, a problem to be managed, a liability to be liquidated. Leo looked from her earnest, uncomprehending face to the heavy iron key in his palm. He felt the weight of it, the weight of a life lived differently, the weight of a legacy he didn't understand. He felt the sting of her judgment, a bitter confirmation of his own deepest fears, that he was lost, adrift, and a burden to those he loved. "I'll think about it," he said, his voice flat. It was a lie, but it was easier than fighting a battle he didn't have the energy for. He turned and walked away, Ghost trotting faithfully at his side. He didn't know what he would do, but as his fingers closed around the old key, he knew one thing. He had to go. He had to see the useless, burdensome place his uncle had left him. He owed him that much. The drive north from Denver was a long, silent pilgrimage. For 2 days, Leo Vance's old pickup truck ate up the miles, the monotonous drone of the engine a steady companion. In the passenger seat, Ghost slept for long stretches, his silver-gray body rising and falling with each breath. But whenever Leo's grip on the steering wheel tightened or a shadow passed over his face, the dog would stir, lifting his head to rest it on Leo's thigh, a quiet gesture of support. They left the sprawling suburbs behind, trading them for the endless plains of Wyoming, and finally, the vast open skies of Montana. The landscape was beautiful in a stark, intimidating way. Mountains clawed at the horizon, their peaks still dusted with early autumn snow. The sky was a boundless expanse of blue, so big it made Leo feel infinitesimally small. It was a land that didn't care for a man's troubles. It simply was. He thought of Clara's words, her practical, sensible plan to erase this piece of their family's history and turn it into a neat number in his bank account. She meant well, he knew. In her world of spreadsheets and 5-year plans, the ranch was an anomaly, an unproductive asset. But as he drove deeper into the wilderness that his uncle had called home, he felt the cold iron key in his pocket and wondered if Arthur had seen a different kind of value, one that couldn't be calculated. The final turn took them off the paved highway and onto a gravel road that wound through stands of pine and aspen. The truck bounced and rattled, kicking up a plume of dust behind them. After another 10 minutes, he saw it. A weathered wooden sign, half swallowed by overgrown bushes, Red Vance Ranch. Leo pulled to a stop and killed the engine. The sudden silence was absolute, broken only by the sigh of the wind through the tall pines. He stepped out of the truck, his boots crunching on the gravel. The ranch was exactly as Clara's pity had described it, and yet it was so much more. It was a picture of profound neglect. The main house, a 2-story wooden structure, sagged slightly to one side, its posture weary. The paint, once a clean white, had peeled and flaked away, revealing the gray, weathered wood beneath. Knee-high weeds and wildflowers choked what might have once been a lawn. A large barn stood nearby, its great doors hanging slightly ajar, a dark, silent mouth. It was desolate. For a long, crushing moment, Leo's shoulders slumped. He felt the full weight of the scene before him. This wasn't a home. It was a tombstone. Clara was right. This was a burden, a final, heavy piece of evidence that his life had veered so far off course that this was all he was deemed fit for. The despair was a cold, physical thing, settling deep in his gut. What was he supposed to do here? Rot away like the fence posts? Then, a flurry of motion broke the stillness. Ghost, who had been waiting patiently, leaped from the truck. But this wasn't the calm, composed service animal Leo knew. A jolt of pure, unadulterated excitement seemed to shoot through him. His tail, usually held in a gentle curve, was now a plume of silver, wagging furiously. His nose was to the ground, then in the air, sniffing, cataloging 1,000 forgotten scents. He took off, not in a frantic run, but with a joyful, loping gait. He circled the house, his paws disappearing in the tall grass. He ran to the leaning porch, placing his front paws on the first step and looking back at Leo, a low, eager whine rumbling in his chest. He raced toward the barn, disappearing into its shadows for a moment before emerging again, his entire body radiating a strange, vibrant energy. Leo watched, stunned. He had never seen Ghost act this way. It wasn't just the freedom of being out of the truck. It was something else. It was a sense of recognition, of coming home. The dog was acting as if he remembered this place, as if he belonged here. The sight of Ghost's inexplicable joy was a small, steady flame against the cold wind of Leo's despair. He looked again at the sagging house, at the peeling paint, and the wild grass. The structures were neglected, yes, but their bones were strong. The foundation wasn't cracked. The roof, though it needed work, was still intact. His uncle had let the surface go in his final years, his health failing. But he had built this place to last. A new feeling began to surface, pushing back against the hopelessness. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was resolve, a quiet, stubborn determination. He didn't understand this place. He didn't understand his uncle's decision. He certainly didn't understand his dog's reaction. But he wouldn't let Clara be right. He wouldn't let this legacy, whatever it was, be sold off to the highest bidder before he even had a chance to uncover its secrets. He would stay. He didn't know for how long. Maybe just long enough to clean the place up, to give it a dignified end. Or maybe, just maybe, long enough to find out why his loyal companion was acting like he had just found the one place in the world he was always meant to be. Leo reached into the truck bed and pulled out his duffel bag. He slung it over his shoulder, the weight a familiar comfort. He walked toward the porch, his boots forging a new path through the untamed grass. Ghost bounded to his side, nudging his hand with his nose, his amber eyes bright with a certainty that Leo was only just beginning to feel. The days that followed settled into a rhythm of hard, physical labor. Leo Vance had decided to tackle the barn first. It was the largest structure, and in his mind, the most daunting. If he could conquer it, the rest of the ranch would feel manageable. The house could wait. He slept in his truck, using a sleeping bag he'd kept from his army days, waking with the sun and working until his muscles burned and the evening chill drove him back to the cab. The inside of the barn was a cavern of shadows and forgotten things. Dust motes danced like fairies in the shafts of light that pierced through the gaps in the roof. The air was heavy with the smell of old hay, dry rot, and the faint, metallic scent of rusted machinery. Leo started in one corner, methodically clearing out decades of accumulated junk, broken tools, stacks of old tires, rotting feed sacks that crumbled to dust in his hands. Ghost was a constant, quiet shadow. He seemed to understand that this was a mission. During the first few days, he explored every corner of the barn, his nose twitching, cataloging the history of the place, in a language of scent that Leo could only guess at. He would occasionally bring Leo a dropped wrench or chase a mouse with a half-hearted pounce, but mostly he kept a watchful, steady presence. It was on the fourth day that his behavior changed. Leo was wrestling with a heavy, canvas tarp that covered a piece of old farm equipment. It was stiff with age and grime, and as he heaved it aside, a cloud of dust billowed into the air. He coughed, wiping his forehead with the back of a dirty glove. When the dust settled, he noticed Ghost was no longer at his side. The German Shepherd stood in the far back corner of the barn, a spot Leo hadn't reached yet. He was perfectly still, his body rigid with an intense focus. His head was lowered, his ears pricked forward, and his nose was just inches from the wooden floorboards. "Ghost? What is it, boy?" Leo called, his voice echoing in the vast space. The dog didn't respond. He didn't even twitch an ear. He took a slow step forward, sniffing deeply along the seams of the planks. Then he lifted his right paw and gently, deliberately, tapped the wood twice. It wasn't a scratch. It wasn't the frantic digging of a dog trying to get at a burrowing animal. It was a clear, concise signal. Leo frowned. "Probably a rat's nest under there," he muttered to himself, turning back to his work. But a few minutes later, he glanced over again. Ghost hadn't moved. He was still fixed on that same spot, his posture unwavering. He repeated the action, a soft but insistent tap of his paw on the floor. A flicker of unease went through Leo. He knew this dog better than he knew most people. He had been paired with Ghost during his final tour, a magnificent animal trained for detection and tracking. He had seen Ghost locate hidden weapons caches with this same quiet intensity. He had watched him find a wounded soldier in the dark with nothing but a scent to go on. Ghost didn't get excited over nothing, and this behavior was not about prey. Leo put down the pry bar he was holding and walked slowly toward the back corner. As he got closer, Ghost looked up at him, his amber eyes holding a look of profound seriousness. He then looked back down at the floorboards and let out a low, soft whine from deep in his chest. Okay, I'm listening," Leo said softly, crouching down beside his companion. He ran his hand over the dusty planks. They looked the same as any other part of the floor. He pressed down on them, but they were solid. He saw no visible cracks, no signs of a hidden door or loose board. He put his nose close to the wood, inhaling. He smelled nothing but old wood, dust, and damp earth. He looked at Ghost. "There's nothing here, bud." Ghost nudged Leo's hand with his wet nose, pushing it insistently toward a specific seam between two wide planks. And then it clicked. Leo's mind went back to his training, to the long hours spent learning to read the subtle cues of his canine partner. This wasn't a game. This was a professional alert. Ghost wasn't reacting to something he could see or hear. He was reacting to a scent. It was a scent so faint, so old, that Leo's dull human senses couldn't detect it. It wasn't the scent of a living creature. Ghost's body language for that was different, more alert, more predatory. This was the calm, focused indication he used for inanimate objects. Leo's mind raced through the possibilities. What could be under there? What could leave a trace of a smell after so many years, a smell only a dog like Ghost could find? He thought of old oil, the kind used to maintain precision equipment. He thought of the faint, sharp smell of ozone that old electronics sometimes give off. Things that had no business being buried under the floor of a barn in the middle of Montana. A shiver that had nothing to do with the cold ran down his spine. He stood up and looked around the vast, silent barn. This wasn't just a place of decay and neglect. It held secrets. His uncle, the quiet veteran who sought solitude, had secrets. Leo placed a hand on Ghost's head, scratching behind his ears. The dog leaned into his touch, his job done, his trust placed fully in the man beside him. "All right, partner," Leo said, his voice a low whisper. "Let's see what you found." He walked back to his pile of tools and picked up the pry bar, its weight now feeling less like a tool for cleaning and more like a key. The weight of the pry bar felt purposeful in Leo Vance's hand. He knelt in the back corner of the barn, the place his partner had indicated, and ran his fingers over the dusty floorboards one last time. Ghost sat a few feet away, a silent, silver-gray statue of unwavering confidence. His amber eyes watched Leo, not with the playful anticipation of a pet, but with the steady gaze of a professional who has completed his task and is now waiting for his handler to do his part. Leo wedged the flattened end of the pry bar into the seam Ghost had nudged. He put his weight into it. The old wood groaned in protest, a long, mournful sound that echoed in the cavernous barn. Splinters popped. With a final, sharp crack, the end of the first plank lifted, releasing the musty smell of the dark earth beneath. He worked methodically, his movements economical and precise. One board, then another. Beneath them was not the packed dirt he expected, but a subfloor of newer, cleaner planks. And set squarely in the middle of this subfloor was a recessed metal ring, flush with the surface, a type of handle designed to be hidden. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. This was no farmer's root cellar. This was deliberately concealed. His military training, dormant for years, now surfaced, sharp and clear. His senses went on high alert. Before touching the handle, he paused. He listened. The only sound was the wind whispering through the gaps in the barn walls and the soft panting of his dog. He scanned the surrounding area, his eyes tracing the beams and shadows, looking for anything out of place, any sign of a trap. The soldier in him was assessing a potential threat, even here, in a place of memory and decay. Satisfied the area was clear, he hooked his fingers through the cold iron ring and pulled. The hatch was heavy, but it lifted smoothly on well-oiled hinges, a stark contrast to the rotten wood he had just pried away. It opened to reveal a steep, narrow staircase leading down into perfect darkness. A current of cool, dry air rose to meet him. It was a clean smell, free of the dampness and mildew that permeated the rest of the ranch. "Stay," Leo commanded softly. Ghost immediately sat, his gaze fixed on the dark opening, ready for the next command. Leo retrieved a heavy-duty flashlight from his tool pile. He clicked it on, its powerful beam cutting a clean white cone into the blackness below. The light revealed sturdy wooden steps and walls lined with smooth, well-fitted planks. He swept the beam around the base of the stairs. No movement, no surprises. "With me," he said. Ghost rose and followed him to the edge. Leo descended first, testing each step before putting his full weight on it. The stairs were solid, built with a craftsman's care. He moved slowly, deliberately, the beam of his flashlight preceding him, Ghost's paws making soft, padding sounds on the steps behind him. When he reached the bottom, he stepped into a room that took his breath away. It was another world. The space was a large, windowless rectangle, but it felt anything but claustrophobic. The air was still and cool, circulated by a small, nearly silent ventilation fan high on one wall. The construction was meticulous. This place was not just reinforced, it was built to withstand time, weather, and perhaps more. His flashlight beam moved across the room, revealing its contents. Against the far wall sat a communications station that looked like something out of a Cold War spy movie. A large, shortwave radio receiver, its dials and gauges gleaming, was flanked by a transmitter. A heavy black microphone sat in its cradle next to a brass Morse code key. Wires were bundled neatly, running to a power source he couldn't see. To the right, shelves were packed with organized supplies. There were not just simple first aid kits, but field surgical supplies, boxes of sealed bandages, IV bags, and neatly labeled bottles of antiseptics and painkillers. It was a field hospital in miniature. On the wall to his left, several large military topographical maps of Montana and its neighboring states were tacked to a corkboard. They were marked with pins, lines, and coded notations that made the back of Leo's neck prickle. This was an operational map, but it was the object in the center of the room that held his attention. A simple, sturdy wooden table stood there, with a single wooden chair tucked neatly beneath it. And on the surface of the table, illuminated by the beam of his flashlight, was a neat stack of leather-bound volumes, journals. Leo approached the table slowly, his boots making no sound on the clean concrete floor. He ran his fingers over the worn leather cover of the top journal. Ghost came to his side and nudged his hand, as if to confirm, "This is it. This is what I found." It all came together in a dizzying rush. The strange will, the lawyer's knowing look, the hidden key in his pocket, the neglected exterior of the ranch hiding this pristine, purposeful sanctuary. His uncle hadn't been a simple recluse, hiding from the world. He had been a soldier still on duty. Leo Vance looked around at the maps, the radio, the medical supplies. He realized with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that he was not standing in an ordinary cellar. He was standing in a secret command center. The air in the hidden room was still, holding the silence of decades. Leo Vance sat in the simple wooden chair, the beam of his flashlight creating a pool of light on the table, illuminating the stack of leather journals. Ghost lay at his feet, his head resting on Leo's boot, a warm, reassuring weight in the profound quiet. For a long time, Leo just sat there, trying to absorb the reality of the command center his uncle had built. Finally, he reached out and took the top journal. The leather was worn smooth, the corners softened with age. He opened it to the first page. The handwriting was a strong, deliberate script, the kind of clean, no-nonsense print that a military man would use. The first entry was dated 1995. He began to read. At first, the entries were simple, almost mundane. Arthur wrote about the ranch, the harshness of the Montana winters, the satisfaction of mending a fence or chopping wood. He wrote about the quiet, the solitude, and how it was the only thing that could silence the echoes of the war he had fought in 1973. Leo felt a deep pang of recognition. He understood that need for silence, for a space big enough to hold the noise in your own head. But as he moved deeper into the journal, the entries began to change. Names appeared, always just first names or call signs. Michael, preacher, Rook. They were not neighbors or friends in the traditional sense. They were men who arrived in the dead of night and left just as quietly a few weeks later. Michael left this morning, one entry read. The nightmares are less frequent. He knows how to breathe again. I sent him on to the next station. He has a chance now. Another entry spoke of a young man who reminded Arthur of a soldier he'd lost in his platoon. This one, Rook, is just a kid. The world broke him, and the system threw him away. We patched up the hole in his shoulder. The one in his soul will take longer. Leo's hands trembled as he turned the pages. He was reading the logs of a secret operation. He picked up the next journal, and the next. The story unfolded, spanning over 20 years. His uncle, the man he thought was a simple recluse, had created a lifeline. He had built an underground railroad for the souls of broken soldiers. In the third journal, he found the name. Arthur had written it at the top of a page, underlining it twice. The Shepherd's Path. The name hit Leo with the force of a physical blow. A shepherd, someone who guides a lost flock, who protects them from predators, who leads them to safe pastures. The ranch wasn't a hideout. It was a sanctuary. It was the first safe pasture on the path. The men who came here weren't running away. They were being guided home. He thought of his own years of drifting after the service, the feeling of being utterly alone, of speaking a language no civilian could understand. He thought of the countless veterans he knew who had fallen through the cracks, lost to despair, or the cold indifference of the system they had sworn to serve. His uncle hadn't just seen the problem. He had built a solution, one man at a time, in the quiet solitude of the Montana wilderness. He read for hours, losing all track of time. The barn above grew dark, and the temperature in the cellar dropped, but Leo felt a fire kindling inside him. It was a warmth he hadn't felt in years. It was the warmth of purpose. He finally reached the last journal. It was thinner than the others, its pages only half filled. The handwriting was shakier now, the strong script of the soldier beginning to waver with age and illness. He flipped to the last written entry, dated just a few months before Arthur's death. The page was not about a visitor or the operations of the network. It was about him. It was about the will. Leo's breath caught in his throat as he read his uncle's final words. The lawyer says, I should be practical. He says I should leave the ranch to Clara. She would sell it, pay off any debts, and give the money to Leo. It is the sensible thing to do. But they do not understand. I must leave the ranch to Leo, not because it is what is left over, but because it is the most important thing I have. Clara has a kind heart, but she only sees value in dollars. She cannot see the true worth of this ground, of these walls. Only a soldier can understand the value of a safe harbor. Only a shepherd can understand the needs of the flock. This is not a burden I leave him. It is a trust, and I trust him to find his way. The words blurred. A single hot tear fell from Leo's eye and splashed onto the page, smearing the ink of his uncle's last testament. The hollowness that had been his constant companion for years was suddenly filled with an overwhelming wave of grief, gratitude, and a profound, aching love. He had not been abandoned. He had not been forgotten or deemed worthless. He had been chosen. This ranch, this crumbling, neglected piece of land, was not a symbol of his failure. It was the ultimate vote of confidence. It was a gift of trust from the one man who had always seen the soldier beneath the scars. Leo closed the journal and held it to his chest. Down here, in the heart of his uncle's secret world, he finally understood. He was home. The week after the discovery in the cellar was one of quiet transformation. A fire had been lit in Leo Vance, not a raging inferno, but a low, steady flame that burned away the fog of apathy. He no longer saw the ranch as a monument to neglect, but as a post he had been assigned to defend. He and Ghost worked from sunup to sundown. He had cleared the overgrown path to the front door, reset a few loose stones on the porch steps, and had begun the monumental task of clearing the clutter from the main house. He was wrestling with a stuck window frame on the ground floor, his worn plaid shirt dusty and his face beaded with sweat, when a sound broke the mountain silence. It was the low, aggressive hum of an expensive car engine, a sound as out of place here as a stock ticker. Ghost, who had been dozing in a patch of sun on the porch, was on his feet in an instant. A low growl rumbled in his chest, not of fear, but of warning. His silver-gray fur bristled slightly along his spine. He positioned himself between Leo and the approaching gravel driveway, a living, breathing line in the sand. A black sedan, polished to a mirror shine, crunched to a stop where Leo's dusty pickup was parked. The driver's side door opened, and Clara emerged, her city heels sinking slightly into the soft dirt. She looked around, her expression a carefully constructed mask of concern that did little to hide her disapproval. From the passenger side stepped a man Leo had never seen before. He was in his late 40s, dressed in a sharp, tailored suit and shoes far too clean for the country. He had a smooth, confident smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was the kind of man who assessed the value of land by the number of luxury cabins he could build on it. "Leo," Clara called out, her voice carrying a note of strained patience. "I was hoping I'd find you here. This is Mr. Hayes. He was kind enough to drive up with me." Mr. Hayes extended a hand, his grip firm and brief. "A pleasure, Mr. Vance. Your sister has told me a great deal about this property. It has potential." Leo wiped his hand on his jeans before shaking it. He said nothing, simply nodding as he looked from the developer back to his sister. Ghost remained at his side, the low growl having subsided to a watchful, unnerving silence. "Can we talk?" Clara asked, gesturing toward the porch. "It's important." Leo leaned his crowbar against the wall and moved to the porch steps, sitting down. Clara and Mr. Hayes remained standing, a subtle but clear power dynamic. Clara took a deep breath. "Leo, I know you said you'd think about it, but we don't have time to waste. That's why I brought Mr. Hayes. He's made a very generous offer." Mr. Hayes stepped forward, his professional smile clicking into place. He opened a sleek leather portfolio. "Mr. Vance, my company specializes in developing rustic luxury resorts. We see this valley as the next premier destination. We're prepared to offer you $300,000 for the entire property as island. We handle all the closing costs, all the paperwork. It's a clean, simple transaction." He laid a glossy brochure on the porch railing. It showed architectural renderings of modern log cabins, a spa, and a fine dining restaurant, all set against a mountain backdrop that looked suspiciously like the one surrounding them. "Our plan involves leveling the existing structures to make way for the main lodge," Mr. Hayes continued, his tone smooth and detached. "The barn, the house, they're unfortunately not salvageable, but the land itself, that's where the real value island. Leveling the existing structures." The words hit Leo like a physical impact. Leveling the barn with its hidden sanctuary. Leveling this house, a place where his uncle had given men a second chance at life. Clara placed a hand on his shoulder. "Leo, listen to him. This is a lifeline. $300,000. Think of what you could do with that. You could get a nice place in the city, go back to school, get the help you need. You wouldn't have to worry anymore. This is me, helping you. Uncle Arthur would have wanted you to be safe and secure, not stuck out here trying to save a place that's beyond saving." She believed it, every word. In her logical, practical mind, this was an act of love. She was rescuing him from a bad decision, saving him from himself. She saw a broken man clinging to a broken building, and she was offering him the only cure she understood: money. For a long moment, the old Leo, the quiet, lost man, was silent. He looked down at his calloused hands. He felt the familiar weight of his family's concern, a weight that had always felt like judgment. But then, he thought of the journals. He thought of the words his uncle had written. Only a soldier can understand the value of a safe harbor. He felt ghost press against his leg, a steady, unwavering presence. He lifted his head, and the man who looked at Clara was not the one she remembered. The hesitation was gone from his eyes, replaced by a calm, unshakable certainty. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it carried across the porch with the authority of a commander. "In number." Clara blinked. "What do you mean, no?" "Leo, be reasonable." "I said no," he repeated, standing up. He was taller than Mr. Hayes, and for the first time, he seemed to fill his own space. "You're not leveling anything. You're not building anything. You're not buying this land." Mr. Hayes's smile tightened. "Mr. Vance, perhaps you don't understand. This is a very strong offer, well above the current market value for undeveloped land in this condition." Leo looked the developer straight in the eye. "You're right. I don't think you understand. You see a dollar amount. You see a blank canvas for your resort. You see something you can exploit, but you don't see what's actually here." He turned to his sister, his voice softening, but losing none of its resolve. "Clara, this place isn't a burden. It's a legacy. It's the most valuable thing Uncle Arthur owned, and it has nothing to do with money. I'm not selling. Not for $300,000, not for $3 million. It's not for sale." The finality in his tone was absolute. Clara stared at him, her mouth slightly open, a look of genuine shock on her face. She was seeing a brother she didn't recognize, a man who was not lost, but found. The black sedan disappeared down the gravel road, leaving a cloud of dust that hung in the still mountain air like an angry ghost. Leo Vance stood on the porch, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his knuckles white. The confrontation had left him shaken, a bitter cocktail of anger and a deep, familiar sorrow churning in his gut. He had won the battle, but the victory felt hollow. He was still alone. Ghost, sensitive to every shift in his handler's mood, whined softly and pressed his head against Leo's thigh. The simple, unconditional support was a grounding force. Leo took a deep, shuddering breath, the clean, pine-scented air doing little to calm the storm inside him. He had a mission now, a legacy to protect, but the sheer scale of it, the rot and decay, the leaking roof and the failing foundation, felt overwhelming. He was one man against a mountain of work. It was then that a new sound drifted up the road. Not the aggressive hum of a luxury car, but the low, rumbling growl of an old, hard-working engine. A few moments later, a faded blue Ford pickup truck, a model from at least 20 years ago, came into view. It was dented and scratched, its bed filled with tools and a spare tire. It pulled to a stop behind his own truck, the engine cutting out with a sputtering sigh. Ghost's ears perked up, but he didn't growl. He let out a low, curious woof, his tail giving a single, hesitant wag. The driver's side door creaked open, and a man emerged. He was older, probably in his early 70s, with a sturdy, broad-shouldered frame that spoke of a life of physical labor. He wore a worn baseball cap, a flannel shirt, and faded denim jeans held up by suspenders. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, etched by years of sun and worry, but his blue eyes were clear and sharp, holding a look of quiet perception. The man didn't approach immediately. He stood by his truck, his gaze taking in the black sedan's fading dust cloud, then Leo on the porch, and finally, the German shepherd at his side. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Saw the city folk leave in a hurry," the man said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "Figured they weren't here to admire the scenery. Thought I'd check in." Leo relaxed his fists. There was no threat here. He could feel it. "Just a family disagreement," he said, his voice hoarse. The old man walked closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at Leo. "You must be Arthur's boy." "Leo." "I'm Ben. Lived over on the next ridge for 40 years. He didn't offer to shake hands, a gesture Leo appreciated. Instead, he just stood there, a quiet, solid presence. Ghost, in an uncharacteristic move, walked down the steps and sniffed Ben's outstretched hand, then gave it a brief, friendly lick before returning to Leo's side. Ben's weathered face broke into a small, genuine smile. "Smart dog. Arthur always did have a way with them." He looked back at Leo, his expression turning serious. "I saw the developer's logo on that car. I know what they want with this valley. I'm guessing you told them no." "I did," Leo confirmed. "Good man," Ben said with another nod. He was silent for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the neglected ranch. "Arthur. He was a good friend. We served in different wars, him in 1973, me a bit earlier, but we spoke the same language. He told me about you. Told me you were coming." Leo's head snapped up. "He told you?" "Not in so many words," Ben clarified. "But he told me he'd made arrangements. He told me to keep an eye on the place after he was gone. He said the right person would show up. I was his gatekeeper, you might say. Made sure no one got too curious about the comings and goings over the years." The word hung in the air between them. Gatekeeper. It was a confirmation, a validation of everything Leo had read in the journals. He wasn't the first person to stand guard here. "You knew," Leo said, his voice barely a whisper. "You knew about the shepherd's path." Ben's expression didn't change, but his eyes softened with a deep, shared understanding. "I knew Arthur gave shelter to those who needed it. That's all I needed to know. The man was a lighthouse in a storm. My job was just to make sure the light stayed on." A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled Leo's knees washed over him. He was not alone. The weight of the mission, the impossible task of rebuilding this place, suddenly felt a little lighter. Ben seemed to sense the shift. "Look, son, this place needs a lot of work. Arthur did what he could, but his body gave out on him these last few years. You can't do it all yourself." He walked past Leo and peered into the dark interior of the house. "You get the generator running yet?" "Haven't found it," Leo admitted. "It's out back," "Behind the woodshed," Ben said, already walking toward the side of the house. He had it hooked up to the main panel, but it's got a trick to it. He led Leo to a small, shed-like structure. Inside was a large diesel generator. Ben pointed to a series of switches. "You gotta flip this one, then this one. Wait 10 seconds, then hit the ignition. Do it in the wrong order, and you'll flood the engine." He then led Leo to the barn, to a large wooden chest Leo had assumed was full of old horse tack. Ben tapped a spot on the bottom. "False floor. Arthur kept his best tools in here, the ones he didn't want rusting. Saws, drills, the good stuff. It is remitty." He showed Leo where Arthur had hidden a cache of non-perishable food, how to prime the old well pump, and which of the floorboards in the house were the weakest. He moved with a quiet, confident familiarity, a man who knew the secrets of this land. Each piece of information was a gift, a tangible piece of support that was worth more than all the money Mr. Hayes had offered. When they returned to the front porch an hour later, the sun was beginning to dip behind the mountains. "You got a long road ahead," Ben said, placing a heavy hand on Leo's shoulder. "But you're not walking it alone. Arthur wouldn't have wanted that." With a final nod, he turned and walked back to his old truck. Leo watched as it rumbled back down the gravel road, its red taillights disappearing into the dusk. He looked out at the vast, silent valley, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like a fortress. And, for the first time in a very long time, Leo Vance felt like he was standing on solid ground. Ben's revelation had been a turning point. The knowledge that he was not the sole guardian of this legacy gave Leo Vance a strength he hadn't realized he was missing. The next morning, Ben returned as promised, his old truck rattling up the driveway just as the sun crested the mountains. He carried a thermos of coffee and 2 tin mugs. "Before we get to the heavy lifting," Ben said, his voice a low rumble in the crisp morning air, "there's one more thing Arthur wanted you to have. Said it was the fuel for the engine." He led Leo not to the barn or the house, but to the old, leaning woodshed. Inside, stacked cords of firewood lined the walls, smelling of pine and thyme. Ben walked to the back wall and began to unstack the wood, revealing a section of the wall that was subtly different. There was no handle, no visible lock. Ben simply pressed a specific knot in the wood, and a small, cleverly hidden panel popped open. Inside the dark recess was a heavy, military-style metal ammunition box. It was locked with a simple combination padlock. Ben looked at Leo, a knowing glint in his blue eyes. "He never told me the combination. Said the right person wouldn't need to be told." Leo's mind immediately went to the journals, to the history that had unfolded before him in the hidden cellar. He thought of the war his uncle had fought, the one that had defined his life and shaped his mission. Without hesitation, he knelt and dialed the 4 numbers into the lock. 1973. The lock clicked open. Leo lifted the heavy lid. The box was not filled with ammunition. It was packed with neat, banded stacks of cash. It wasn't a fortune, but it was substantial. Tucked on top was a small, leather-bound ledger. Leo opened it. Inside, in his uncle's precise script, were records of every dollar, donations from veterans who had been helped and were now paying it forward, contributions from a few trusted allies like Ben. It was meticulously documented. This wasn't a secret stash of money. It was the operational fund for the Shepherd's Path. Seeing the careful accounting, the years of quiet, diligent work solidified Leo's resolve into something unbreakable. This was not a lucky find. It was the passing of a torch. "Now we can get to work," Ben said, clapping a hand on Leo's back. The days that followed were a blur of focused, purposeful labor. With the funds to buy lumber, wiring, and plumbing supplies from the town's hardware store, the restoration began in earnest. The work was grueling, but it was a good kind of pain. It was the ache of building, not the ache of breaking. Leo's military skills, long dormant, proved invaluable. He had been a communications specialist, and the radio in the cellar was a puzzle he was uniquely qualified to solve. He spent his evenings down there, ghost a quiet presence at his feet, tracing wires, cleaning contacts, and studying the complex diagrams Arthur had left behind. He treated the old equipment with a surgeon's care, understanding that this wasn't just a machine, it was the heart of the network. It was the voice in the wilderness that had called so many lost soldiers home. During the day, he and Ben worked on the physical structures. They started with the roof of the main house, stripping away the rotten shingles and replacing the damaged timbers. Ben, despite his age, worked with the steady, efficient rhythm of a man who had been working with his hands his entire life. He taught Leo how to measure twice and cut once, how to trust the feel of the wood, how to build something that would stand against the harsh Montana winds. Ghost was their foreman. The silver-gray German shepherd seemed to have an innate sense of the project. He would often lie near a section of the porch that was particularly rotten, or sit patiently by a wall where the wiring was frayed, long before the men had identified the problem. Ben would just chuckle and shake his head. That dog's got an old soul, knows this place better than we do. They worked as a team, two veterans from different generations, united by a shared purpose. They spoke little, their communication flowing through shared tasks and mutual respect. In the evenings, they would sit on the newly repaired porch, drinking coffee from Ben's thermos, as the stars began to appear in the vast, dark sky. Ben would tell stories of Arthur, of the quiet, stubborn man who had turned his own pain into a source of healing for others. Leo listened, and for the first time, he began to truly understand his uncle, not as a distant figure from his childhood, but as a brother in arms. One evening, after a long day of rewiring the main floor, Leo went down to the cellar. He had finally reconnected the last wire on the shortwave radio. He took a deep breath, flipped a series of switches, and the old machine hummed to life. A soft amber glow emanated from the dials. He picked up the microphone. He didn't know who, if anyone, was listening. He didn't know if the network still existed beyond this quiet valley, but he had to try. He keyed the microphone, his voice steady. He spoke the call sign he had found in the first journal, a simple, hopeful phrase. "This is Shepherd's Gate," he said into the silence. "The light is on. Shepherd's Gate is open." He released the key and waited, the only sound the soft hum of the radio and the steady thump of his own heart. The silence that followed Leo Vance's transmission stretched for an eternity. He sat in the cool, subterranean air of the command center, his hand still resting on the microphone key. The only sound was the low hum of the radio and the steady, rhythmic thump of Ghost's tail against the concrete floor. The dog seemed to sense the monumental importance of the moment, his amber eyes fixed on Leo, his entire being a study in hopeful patience. 1 minute bled into 5, then 10. Doubt, a cold and familiar companion, began to creep into the edges of Leo's newfound resolve. Had he been too late? Had the network his uncle so carefully built finally crumbled to dust after his passing? Was he just a lone voice calling out into an empty wilderness? He was about to shut down the radio for the night when a faint crackle broke the silence. It was almost imperceptible, a whisper of static. Leo leaned closer, his heart leaping into his throat. He adjusted the receiver dial with a surgeon's precision. And then, a voice came through, faint and distorted by distance, but unmistakably human. "Repeat your transmission." "Is that you, Shepherd's Gate?" "Over." Leo's hand, slick with sweat, gripped the microphone. He pressed the key, his own voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "This is Shepherd's Gate. The light is on. I repeat, the light is on. Over." The reply came back stronger this time, clearer. "Understood, Shepherd's Gate. We read you. It's been a long time. Welcome back. This is Riverbend Station. Standing by. Over." 1. Riverbend Station. The name was in the journals. A safe house in Idaho, run by a former Navy corpsman. They were still there. They had been waiting. A wave of profound, bone-deep relief washed over Leo. He leaned back in the chair, a ragged, incredulous laugh escaping his lips. Ghost, sensing the shift from tension to triumph, rose to his feet and nudged Leo's arm, his tail now wagging in earnest. He wasn't alone. The shepherd's path was not a memory. It was alive. That first contact was like a key turning in a long rusted lock. In the days that followed, more voices crackled to life over the old radio, a station in Oregon run by a husband and wife, both Air Force veterans. A quiet farm in Wyoming. One by one, the scattered embers of Arthur's network were fanned back into a flame. They were cautious at first, using old codes and call signs, but as they confirmed Leo's identity as Arthur's chosen successor, the conversations became warmer, filled with relief and a renewed sense of hope. The news spread through the quiet channels of the veteran community. The legend of Arthur's ranch, a place of sanctuary, had not died with him. It was being rebuilt. And then, people started to show up. The first was a man named Martinez, a former Marine who had known Arthur. He drove up one morning in a truck, loaded with carpentry tools, and declared he was there to help rebuild the porch. A few days later, two younger veterans, recently discharged, arrived. They had heard the whispers and wanted to be a part of something that mattered. They were skilled electricians, and they set to work overhauling the house's ancient wiring. The ranch was no longer a place of solitude. It became a hive of activity, of shared purpose. The air filled with the sounds of hammers, saws, and the easy camaraderie of soldiers. Men who had felt lost and invisible in the civilian world found a new mission. They were rebuilding not just a house, but a home. They were rebuilding a piece of themselves. Ghost was in his element, moving among the volunteers, offering a reassuring nudge or a friendly lick, a four-legged morale officer in a coat of silver gray. Leo, in the midst of it all, found a new kind of peace. He was a leader again, not by shouting orders, but by working alongside his new brothers in arms, sharing a common goal. One afternoon, as a small team worked to install new windows, a sleek, unfamiliar car pulled up the driveway. It wasn't Clara's. A man in a business suit got out. He was a lawyer, and he handed Leo an official-looking envelope. His heart sank. It was from Clara. She was making good on her threat. That night, Leo sat with Ben on the nearly completed porch, the legal papers spread between them. It was a formal petition to have the property declared derelict and sold at public auction, with Clara, as next of kin, claiming the proceeds. "She's playing hardball," Ben said, his voice grim. "I don't have the money to fight her in court," Leo said, the weight of the world settling back on his shoulders. Just then, Martinez and the two electricians walked over. They had overheard the conversation. "Let me see that," Martinez said, taking the papers. He was a quiet, serious man who had served as a paralegal in the Marines. He read the document carefully. "This is an intimidation tactic. It'll take months to get a hearing. In the meantime, we need to make this place official." The younger electrician, whose name was Sam, spoke up. "We should form a nonprofit, a 501c3. It would protect the property and make it eligible for grants. My sister's a lawyer. She helps veterans with this kind of thing for free." The idea took hold immediately. In the following weeks, what had been an informal gathering of volunteers transformed into an organized force. With the help of Sam's sister, they filed the paperwork to create the Shepherd's Path Foundation. The story of their mission, a sanctuary for veterans built by veterans, was picked up by a local newspaper. The article reached Clara's lawyer in Denver. He called her immediately. He explained that suing her brother was no longer a simple matter. She would be suing a registered nonprofit organization dedicated to helping veterans, an organization that was rapidly gaining public support and community backing. It would be a long, expensive, and very ugly fight, one she was unlikely to win. Clara, above all else, was a pragmatist. She understood numbers. She understood risk versus reward, and she understood a losing battle when she saw one. A week later, a second envelope arrived. It was a single page, a legal document formally withdrawing her petition. The war for the ranch was over. A year can be a lifetime. Leo Vance stood on the front porch of the restored ranch house, a mug of steaming coffee warming his hands, and knew this to be true. The man who had arrived here a year ago, A hollowed-out shell of a soldier haunted by ghosts, was gone. In his place stood a man who had found his footing on solid ground. The ranch had been reborn alongside him. The sagging roof was now straight and strong, the gray, weathered wood covered in a fresh coat of clean white paint. The porch, once a treacherous collection of rotten planks, was now a welcoming space, its floorboards solid under his worn boots. Where weeds had choked the life from the earth, a small, tidy garden now grew, its rows of vegetables a testament to patience and hard work. The air no longer smelled of decay and neglect, but of fresh pine, rich soil, and the faint, comforting scent of wood smoke from the chimney. The ranch wasn't just repaired, it was alive. At his side, Ghost sat with a quiet, regal stillness, his silver gray and white coat thick and healthy. The anxious energy he had carried for Leo for so long had been replaced by a deep, settled calm. He was no longer just a service dog, an anchor in a storm. He was the master of his domain, a watchful, welcoming spirit of the sanctuary they had built together. He lifted his head and nudged Leo's hand, a familiar gesture that now felt less like a question and more like a statement of shared peace. Leo scanned the valley, the morning sun casting long shadows from the towering pines. The silence was no longer a suffocating void. It was a peaceful, quiet, filled with the gentle hum of life. He had found what his uncle had found here, a space big enough to hold the past without being consumed by it. The sound of an engine, a sputtering, unhealthy cough, drifted up the long gravel driveway. It was a sound he had come to recognize. It was the sound of someone running on empty. Ghost's ears swiveled, and he rose to his feet, walking to the edge of the porch. There was no growl, no defensive posture. He simply stood and watched, his tail giving a slow, steady wag. An old, beat-up sedan, its paint faded, and a spiderweb of cracks in its windshield, came into view. It pulled to a stop where the pristine cars of developers and lawyers had once parked. The engine died with a final, shuddering gasp. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the driver's side door opened, and a young man emerged. He couldn't have been more than 22. He was thin, almost gaunt, and wore a dusty army surplus jacket that hung loosely on his frame. His face was pale and drawn, and his eyes, wide and haunted, darted around, taking in the house, the barn, the vast, intimidating landscape. He looked like a man who had reached the end of his road and wasn't sure if he had the strength to take another step. Leo recognized the look. He had seen it in the mirror for years. He set his coffee mug down on the railing. He didn't move forward, not wanting to spook the kid. He just stood there, a calm, steady presence. "You found the right place," he said, his voice quiet but clear, carrying easily in the still air. The young man flinched, startled. He hadn't seen Leo on the porch. His eyes locked on Leo, then flickered to the large German shepherd standing beside him. He looked ready to bolt. Ghost seemed to understand. He took a few slow steps down from the porch and sat at the bottom, his posture relaxed and non-threatening. He let out a soft, low woof, a gentle invitation. The young soldier's shoulders, which had been tensed up to his ears, lowered a fraction. His gaze shifted back to Leo. They said there was a place," the young man said, his voice cracking with exhaustion and a desperate, fragile hope. "A place for guys like me." Leo nodded slowly. He saw it all in the kid's eyes. The sleepless nights, the memories that played on a loop, the crushing feeling of being a stranger in the world he had fought to defend. He saw his own reflection, the ghost of the man he had been. But looking at that reflection now, he felt no fear, no despair. He felt only a profound, compassionate understanding. He felt a purpose. "They were right," Leo said, his voice gentle. He took a step forward, his hands open at his sides. "The path was long, I know, but you're here now. You're safe." He walked down the steps and stood before the young man. He didn't offer a handshake. He didn't ask for a name or a story. That would come later, when it was ready to be told. Instead, he simply looked the young soldier in the eye, one soldier to another. "Welcome to Shepherd's Gate," he said. "We've been waiting for you." The young man's face crumpled. The dam of forced strength he had been holding back for so long finally broke. Tears welled in his haunted eyes and streamed down his face. He didn't sob, just stood there as the silent tears fell, a quiet surrender to the exhaustion. Leo didn't move to comfort him. He just stood there, a witness, giving him the space to finally let go. He had found his own peace, not by running from his past, but by building a place where others could find shelter from theirs. He had taken a bitter inheritance and forged it into a mission, and in the process of saving others, he had finally, truly, saved himself. The shepherd's path was open, and the new shepherd was home.